Hey everyone, I'm Randy and I'm here with James Bellerjo, my partner. This is the Passionately Wrong podcast. And today we have a good friend of mine who's a guest, Chaplain Charlie Shields. And we're just going to get into it and ask some questions about what, anything to do about chaplains in the military, because I was in the military for over 30 years and I got questions. And I know James does, and probably a lot of you guys too. Real quick, I'll just go through his bio. I joined the Army at 17, joined on a Ranger contract, much like myself, a couple of years before I did. Served 8 years on active duty as an infantryman. Then he got out, and he spent 12 years studying theology, earning a BA in theology, a master's in divinity, and a doctor of ministry. And after a 17-year break from service, he direct commissioned back in as an Army chaplain in 2009. And he served over 20 years now, I think. We'll get into that in a minute. And he just made the lieutenant colonel promotion list. And he's been married for 36 years to his lovely wife, Patty. He has two children, a son who graduated West Point in the class of 2020 and serving in the 82nd right now. And a daughter who lives in Louisville, and I believe she just got married to a Apache pilot. And that's about it. So we're going to get directly into the main question of this episode, which is, Charlie, what drew you into the chaplaincy? I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah, the chaplain corps in the Army. So it's I'll try to keep it short. It's a pretty, kind of a long story. When I enlisted in the Army, I wasn't a believer. I wasn't a Christian. And but during my time, believe it or not, as a drill sergeant, my wife and I were invited to a Christian church, and we heard the gospel and became believers. And so I got out. And when I got out of the Army in 1984 or 1992, I thought for certain that was it for me. I thought I was done with the Army. And to be honest with you, I mean, it was like a slow death for me, because I missed the Army. I loved the Army. I loved the camaraderie and the toughness and all the things that you just do as a soldier. And went to school, figured I was going to be in the ministry the rest of my life. I had a friend of mine that said to me, get as much education as you can. And so I did. And I'd finished my doctorate degree in 2005 and was teaching as an adjunct professor at Indiana University in Richmond, Indiana, and pastoring a church in Newcastle, Indiana. And I went to a convention and I saw the chief of chaplains, and he was a Ranger qualified guy. And he came walking by me as a two-star named Doug Carver, Chaplain Carver. Just a super great human being, great man, great leader. And I said, hey, General, Rangers lead the way. And he stopped and he said to me, how do you know that? And I said, you know how I know that. And he said, call me chaplain, not general, and you need to be an Army chaplain. I said, I'm too old to be an Army chaplain, because I thought I'd missed the deadline. And he asked how old I was. I just turned 42. And he said, you have prior service, you're not too old. And I could not believe what he was telling me, that I could come back in the Army as a chaplain. And so what I heard him saying to me was, you can do what God has put a passion in your heart to do, which is the ministry. And you can do it in a place that you've missed for 17 years, which was the Army. And I was like overwhelmed with joy that this was even a possibility. And Patty and I talked about it. We prayed about it. And a couple of months later, I was back in the Army as an Army chaplain, direct commission as a captain. And the rest is history, as they say.
Hey, James, one of the things you don't know about Charlie is he's a running ninja. So when he says he came in at 40, he's like, I'm too old, I'm 40, but he can run most people into the dirt. He could outrun me easily, probably in my best days when I was younger. And he's a couple of years older than me. He's still running new lieutenants, and young sergeants probably are cursing him as they're eating his smoke. And James, on the other hand, Charlie is a big runner too. He's run marathons all around the world. We had a couple episodes where we talked about his running escapades. So you guys got a lot in common there. James, what do you got for Charlie?
I would like to just spend a moment on your education. I think you said you spent 12 years studying theology, and I'm interested in your friend said get as much education as you can. Did you know when you started you were going to go all the way, or did it just sort of fit naturally? And if you can say a word about the actual degrees They sound to me like something out of Harry Potter, and I don't mean any disrespect, but the BA in theology, fine. The Master of Divinity and a Doctor of Ministry. Why are they? Well, okay, maybe you can just explain those to me. I don't understand the progression of theology, divinity, and ministry, but
And
I'd be interested. Go ahead.
and did you use the GI Bill? I'd be interested to know that too.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I jokingly tell folks that when I got out of the Army to go to college, I went, having graduated third in my class from high school, 8 years later to go to college, but I was third from the bottom. So the fact that I could read anything beyond my name tape was a minor miracle. So I was like a very blunt crayon when I started college. The first day I started college, I ended up going to a Christian university to get a degree in theology and the studies of Christian theology, because I was going to be in the ministry. And I brought the books home and I stacked them up on the table and I sat down looking at them, and I was downcast. My wife said, what's the matter? And I said, I have to read those books in this first semester of school, and that's more than I've read in my entire life combined. I think I've made a mistake. And she said, you haven't made a mistake. I'm married way above my class. My wife said, you haven't made a mistake. And she said, you are an airborne ranger that's a minister now. There's nothing you can't do. And so I dug in and I started studying, and I did not take school seriously at all as a high school student. I just saw it as a means to an end, which is to get into the Army. So when I got into college, I found that college was really interesting to me. I was reading things that I had never even heard of, just even the basics. I remember I took a J term at Lorraine B. Wallace Junior College in Andalusia, Alabama, and took a J term in English, and I had to read the Iliad and the Odyssey. And people don't believe me when I tell them this. I read it from cover to cover without putting it down. I couldn't put it down. And then, as I got into my actual degree classes on theology in the New Testament, the Old Testament, I loved the Bible. And so I ended up graduating in 3.5 years. I did not have the GI Bill, Randy, because I was that young hard ranger that thought, I'm never going to go to college. Why would I go to college? I'm going to be a command sergeant major in the Army. So I didn't apply for it. And so Patty and I worked very hard. My wife was a social worker, and I worked a couple of different jobs, and then I earned some scholarships, and we paid for college as we went. I just paid for it as we went. It wasn't nearly as expensive as it is now. That was back in 1992 to 95. And then to be in the ministry in the Protestant film that I'm in, I was a Baptist. The advanced degree, there's multiple different advanced degrees that you can get at seminaries, but the entrance level into seminary is a bachelor's degree, an accredited bachelor's degree. And so a lot of seminary students come there, and some have degrees in accounting, or some have degrees in business or math or something, and then they enter the ministry. So seminary was really designed as an advanced degree for men in my field, called in the ministry, that did not have the Bible theological ground. But because I went to a Christian school with a Bible degree, I was able to come into my master's degree at an advanced level. So whereas my classmates in the first year, and a master's of divinity is 96 semester hours, so it's 3 years full time. I don't know if when America began, the three most educated people in most towns were the doctor, the lawyer, and the preacher, right? So it's a rigorous degree. It's 3 years full time. I did it in 3 years. I did 96 hours in 3 years, and I did an advanced degree in that as well. And then the pastor that was responsible for Patty and I coming to faith, he said, anecdotally, he said, we have enough uneducated preachers. We don't need another one. So get educated so you can answer questions, and so you know what you believe and what you don't believe. And so I just said, hey, I want to go get another degree. And so I didn't want to commit, what they call an academia, which is, intellectual incest. So I went to another school to get new professors and new challenges. And you can either go the PhD route or the D-Min route. And so I wanted to do a PhD, but the struggle that I had at the time was that a PhD would have required me to live on campus, where a D-Min did not. And so it's a little bit different, not quite as rigorous. the writing is not quite as rigorous, even though you still have a pretty hefty writing. I think my ended project ended up being like 130 pages. So I chose the field of homiletics, preaching. So I have a doctorate of ministry in preaching. So I'm supposed to be like the quintessential guy who can both properly interpret scripture and assemble a good sermon. And so those are my degrees.
Excellent. Thanks for that description. And I like how it is a combination of both practical, sort of this is what you do if you want to go this route, but also circumstance-based. Hey, I don't want to live on campus, or I want a different challenge. And that sort of describes how life unfolds for a lot of people. They have an idea, and then they have their circumstances. And if they're lucky, they can put the two together and somehow find a way. This isn't exactly in the order of things, but I'm just curious if you can give me and listeners a high level overview of why does the Army have chaplains? I understand a lot of the roles of in the Army from my discussions with Randy, and they seem very pragmatic and focused on the task at hand. We got to go do this thing, and we need this many logistics people and cooks and parachute riggers and support staff. What would you say is sort of a couple of the roles that the chaplains fulfill for the Army? Why do they think you're there, and why do you think they're there, if there's any difference?
Yeah. So, well, there. All right. So I will go historically. George Washington, establishes the Army and the infantry, and then the quartermaster corps and the chaplains kind of argue on who was next. Was it them or us? But we're definitely either number 2 or number 3, established by George Washington himself. Because we are a country of religion, a country of faith. And so our service members that come from all walks of life, come into the military, are men and women of faith. And so the very foundation of our Army, it said that we need religious leaders to be in uniform alongside the men and women that are serving, who are men and women of faith. And so we say doctrinally that we provide or we perform religious support to our service members, their families, and the civilians and workforce. Provide or perform. So provide meaning that I'm a Christian, but if you are, I'm a Protestant. So if you're Roman Catholic and you come to me and you're looking for something that is particular to your Roman Catholic faith, I can't perform that because I'm not Roman Catholic. But I am the subject matter expert to find where that can be provided to you. So I become the connector. If you come and you're a Protestant and you're not looking for a particular type, a particular Protestant, if you're Episcopal or if you're Presbyterian or Baptist, and you're just saying, hey, I need to talk to a chaplain about spiritual matters, then I would perform that. I would be that person for you. So we all serve in Army chapels. It says in all of our orders, no matter where we serve, whatever unit we're serving in, that when we're not gone, that we also serve the chapels and the posts where we're at. So we do things that are spiritual in nature, but that isn't all. Chaplains are also very much soldiers. We all have to meet the requirements to be a soldier to get in the Army. You have to have the education requirements, which is a minimum of a bachelor's and master's of divinity. You have to meet the physical requirements like anybody else that wants to join the Army. And then you become part of what's called the special staff. So we're staff officers in the units. And so we also have staff responsibilities, reporting and serving other activities at the will of the command. And I advise the commander. So because what's unique about a military chaplain is we have the most protected confidentiality of anybody probably in America. Almost anyone in America, if someone was to confess to you that they had committed a crime, they are required by law to report that crime. Chaplains are not. We have complete confidentiality. It's been taken to the Supreme Court to protect. And the purpose of that is so that service members know that they have a safe place that they can go and talk to about anything. So what I provide, as well as I provide moral and morale support for our service members. And no two chaplains are alike. We all have different skill sets. Like I said, I love the Army, and so I'm very much a soldier's soldier. I do not lack for having people to come and see me, to talk with me. And I've heard soldiers come to see me for, you name it. Especially when I was serving with Randy in 7th Special Forces Group. Absolutely, just about anything that they could come and talk to chaplains about. When I was serving in one of my previous units, I had an issue going on with a service member and the commander, and I've always been very close with my commanders and my command sergeants major. Commander came in and he asked me kind of what the details were with this, and I said, I can't tell you that. And he was like, "Oh, Charlie, come on, I mean, just between you and me, I think I know what's going on." And I said, "I can't tell you. Do you know why I can't tell you?" And he said, "Because of confidentiality." And I said, "That's correct. I can't tell you because of confidentiality. But there's a bigger reason why I can't tell you." And he said, "Why is that? What's the bigger reason?" I said, "Because you need to know that at some point in your life, you need a safe place to go and talk to someone, that you could come and talk to me. And no other personal relationship that I have with anyone else in the Army would tempt me to share your secrets. So I can't share anyone's with you, so that you know that you could also trust me with yours if you ever need to talk." And he was like, "I never thought of it like that. I'll never ask another chaplain." So that's kind of what we provide. I mean, we provide a lot, and good chaplains, good soldiers provide a lot. I mean, I am a ranger, and I'm also a jump master. I pull jump master duties. I've been airborne commander. Man, my goodness, the number of things that we've done that we do, but what I often tell folks is that there's no job too small or too great to ask me to help with. And so we often have the most flexible schedules. So I try to be a combat multiplier. I try to be that extra set of hands that makes a difference no matter where I am and no matter what it is. If it's running the vacuum cleaner or taking out the trash or TCing a movement in a vehicle or whatever it is.
I got a question. I got a couple questions that I don't know the answer to. Well, first of all, James, Charlie, I don't know if he knows, or if he's probably got the most jumps of any chaplain in the Army ever. I don't know who else would have more. I mean, he's been in so many airborne units, and because he's a jump master, and for those of us people listening don't know, a jump master is basically the authority to kind of bless off on other people being ready to jump, to go out of a plane. And they also kind of make the designation like, hey, is the weather correct right now? Are we actually going to jump out of this plane right now? And all those kind of decisions. And as a result, most jump masters end up jumping a lot more than their normal jumper, because they have to be in every stick. You have to have one jump master in every stick. And a lot of times, you'll have a jump for a unit and they'll have 20 sticks. And the guy who jump mastered the first stick will get off after he finishes landing, he'll get in the truck and go back to where the planes are taking off and do another one, because there's not enough jump masters. So he may do 2 or 3 in a day. And as opposed to the normal jumpers are just getting 1 or something like that. So I don't know how many jumps Charlie has. I think it's more than I ever had in my life. I had like 122 or something by the end of my career. And I was jumping pretty much my whole career, except for maybe a year or 2 at the end when I was in Italy. But my question is, so when I jumped into Panama during Just Cause, the chaplain assistant was behind me and the chaplain was in the plane in front of me. And I have no idea what the rules are, or if it's a choice about bringing weapons to combat. As far as chaplains and chaplains assistants, I believe the chaplain assistant is allowed to bring a weapon, either if nothing else, to protect you. But I don't know if it's a personal choice, or you're not supposed to, or you're not issued one, or anything like that. And so that was my big question right there. And then we got some more after that.
The chaplains are considered non-combatants, and we are. Not only do we not carry, we're prohibited from carrying weapons, and now they used to be called chaplain assistants. A couple of years ago, they changed their designation to religious affairs specialists or religious affairs non-commissioned officers if they're sergeants or above. And yeah, their job is force protection. It isn't just force protection, but they certainly are. And the fact that when you jumped into Panama in 375, that the 56 Mike was with you and the chaplain was in another plane was a horrible plan. I mean, imagine if your PL was with you, but his RTO was in the other plane. Like, what kind of plan was that? So,
Well, I mean, the question was, what kind of plan was the whole plan? I mean, there was
yeah,
all
fair enough.
squads and teams were split up between. It was everyone for themselves. You're lucky you got a seat in the plane half the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think the next question that I'd like to know, and I'm going to jump in front of James, is what's the selection assessment and selection course for chaplains, and how does that whole thing work, and for chaplain aides, chaplain assistants as well, if you don't mind.
So for chaplain, for the 56 mic, it's just like anyone else that joins the Army, whatever their GT score requirement is, and if you can get in the Army, you can be a religious affairs specialist or religious affairs NCO if that's the desired route that you want to go, and nothing special, no special requirements. For chaplains, you have to have a bachelor's and a master's of divinity or its equivalent. You also have to have an endorsing agent. And so an endorsing agent means that you have one of the recognized agencies that the Army has a list. The Chief of Chaplain's office has a large list, and it's a very large list. It's not a small list. And so if you're a Baptist, it might be the Southern Baptist Convention, which their endorsing agent would be North American Mission Board. That's mine. Or you might be the Presbyterian Church of America or the Presbyterian Church USA, or it might be Missouri Synod Lutheran, or it could be the Roman Catholic Church, that they're one large endorsing agent, or it could be the Latter-day Saints are an endorsing agent. So if you can think about it, if you've ever known of anyone that's professed some type of faith, it could be Muslim, it could be Hindu, it could be Buddhist, Universalist, but there is an actual list of authorized endorsers that have to say, we recognize that this man or woman has been credentialed and ordained, and we send them as our missionary into the military. And what's unique about that is that if at some point I was to do something to lose my endorsement, the clock starts ticking when I have to have another endorser, or I have to get out of the Army. I cannot be in the Army as an Army chaplain, no matter how physically fit I am and how competent I am and how well I perform in my duties, if I do not have an endorser. So every military chaplain meets the physical requirements to get in, the educational requirements to get in, and the endorsing requirements to get in. And even then, it doesn't guarantee, because we have to go through an accession board. And there's a specific group of chaplains at the Chief of Chaplain's office that when we submit our packets, that the chaplain recruiters get those packets and submit them. And then they have certain criteria that they're looking for. Do we have enough of this, or do we have too many of this, or too few of this? And that's how you end up. And luckily for me, when I came back in, my packet was in 2008. We were in the midst of fighting 2 wars, and we didn't have enough of chaplains. And so I came, no hiccups at all. I didn't have any physical issues. I don't take any medicine or anything. I wasn't overweight. And so I submitted my packet, and it went straight through and right into the Army.
So I got a couple of questions that come up as I hear you talking, and I'm sure Randy does as well. But just to stick with what you said most recently, Charlie, the endorsement and that you are sent in as a missionary, that to me, that word just puts to mind the idea of trying to proselytize and convert people, which I don't get is the sense of what you're there for. You said before, provide or perform. So if you can perform any services directly, fine, but otherwise you're non-denominational. I don't know what the right word is. You're
that's right.
How do you see your role in terms of if someone comes to you and they're practicing a very different religion that you might be familiar with, and you say, hey, I know there's another chaplain who can be more helpful to you, or how would you direct somebody who was not of the Protestant Catholic faith? I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just what you said. If someone comes, my job is to not, we use the term missionary. I come from a Baptist background, and we use the term missionary as someone that's been sent out that represents the Baptist faith, right? And I know that some people may interpret that as, well, are they sent out to proselytize to the Baptist faith? I certainly would not shy away from having a conversation with someone that's asking questions. I had someone asking me questions at work today. I believe in predestination, and the word got out about, the chaplain believes in predestination. So I had 2 people today asking me about, like, what is that? Why do you believe in that? Right. And so when anyone's asking questions, I am free to answer those questions. Now, but I'm not free to proselytize, to go out and try to win people over to my way of thinking, or to bring them into my faith. So if when I will always ask someone, when someone comes to see me for marriage counseling or life counseling or spiritual counseling, or they're asking what I would call the ultimate questions: who is God? Is he knowable? Is there an afterlife? I always ask, what is your spiritual background? Do you have a background? And if it's something that's contrary to mine, I will ask them, would you prefer to talk to a chaplain that would share that kind of a background? And if they say yes, then I find one. And if they say, no, you'll do just fine, I want to hear what you have to say, then we have a dialogue.
Okay, perfect.
The Army is, I tell folks all the time, the Army is a big tent, and I get to serve in this big tent. And so if I would say that you have this much room to function in, I'm not going to give up all of this room to function in over this much ground that I can't control.
So I had one other observation from something you said before, which is how different the Army sounds to me in terms of acknowledging that people are coming in with their faith. You said we're a country of faith, and we were from the beginning, and therefore the chaplains were the very next or the third to come in. And yet we were very careful to keep religion out of government. And in the business world, which is where I come from, we're also try pretty hard to keep it out of the day-to-day work experience. And to the point where, you get legal fights like the Supreme Court decision that just came down about what sort of religious accommodation does a business have to offer to someone who is practicing their faith. The delivery driver, does he have to work on Sunday, or can they let him take a day off? Whereas the Army's approach, if I understood you correctly, is quite different. Not only do you not try to keep it away, you're openly acknowledging that, hey, we're taking people as they come in, and we want them to not have to put their faith aside. Besides, you're interacting with people when they have issues or questions. Are there other elements where it's either correct or not correct? Just to carry that thought a little bit further, how much does the Army merely tolerate versus accommodate versus encourage people to practice their faith, if you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. So the Army is, we're making a shift since I've been in since January of 2009. I've seen a recent uptick, positive upshift, where when I first came in, there was a great deal of, be very careful about, if you're going to pray publicly, pray in the name of Jesus. If you're a Christian, be very careful about, appearing to be proselytizing or appearing to be promoting your faith, right? Just be careful. There was a lot of cautionary instruction. And recently what the Army has realized is that the holistic human being, that there is an aspect of them called the spiritual aspect of them. Spirituality, not religion, but spirituality. And the Army has said, hey, we are not doing all that we can do to make our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines the strongest person they can if we ignore this spiritual side of things. And so they encourage us to have conversations about spirituality. And if that also entails a religion, then it does. For some, spirituality is not religious, but for many, it is religious. Now, what the Army is very clear about is that no commander and no chaplain can in any way, shape, or form impress upon service members that are at a required function for it to be religious. So if there's a formation, and I'm asked to give an invocation, we're asked to pray in a way in which it can be inclusive for the people that are there, that doesn't violate our faith group, right? So the Army is aware of that. The Army is aware that we do separate, church and state, but we're not there to proselytize it or to in any way, shape, or form, I guess, impress it. We're there to accommodate the faith that's already present in uniform. I came to faith in uniform. I wasn't a Christian when I was a sergeant in the Army. It was my time in the Army that caused me to ask questions about, man, is there a God, and is there an eternity, and what happens when we die? And I tried to go find it in 1990, and I tried to find a chaplain. What's funny is that I couldn't find a chaplain. I was looking, I didn't look too hard, obviously, or I'd have found one. But I didn't find a chaplain. I ended up going to a church off post, is where I ultimately came to faith. But I went looking for a chaplain. because I figured if there's anyone that should be able to tell me about faith, it ought to be a chaplain. So I think that's a very important aspect that we bring. My son is in the Army. My daughter is married to the Army. My son just told me today, hey, we just met our new chaplain. I like him a lot. I'm glad that we have chaplains in the Army.
I'm curious about something I've been reading about in the popular press, which is that the military is having a harder time these days meeting its recruiting targets. And your mention of your son and your daughter both being either in or married to the military. One of the things I've read more recently is that there's less enthusiasm among military families. Parents are not as willing to encourage their children to enter the Army. Just curious whether you have any views of the situation from the inside about the recruiting topic generally, and then more personally, if you're willing to talk about it, how you feel about your kids being in the Army. Do you notice any of what I'm seeing reported that, people are souring a little bit on it?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's complex. It baffles me. I don't really know what is really fueling that. I don't know whether it's just as a nation, we're going through, a transition right now, and there's no war that's going on. I mean, the surge, we never had to enact the draft during a war when we were fighting on two fronts. That says a lot about our country, right? I mean, we had the draft in Vietnam. We didn't have to draft anyone for Iraq and Afghanistan. I joined during the height of two wars that was going on. There is no war now. I think that it sounds to me as though I'm not on the outside. I'm not working on the outside, but it sounds like there's plenty of opportunities for work. Sometimes the Army or the military is a means to provide for yourself. It was for me. It was a means to escape a very dysfunctional home. That's one of the reasons that I was so quickly drawn to the military when I was 17. And so I think that there's more opportunities that are out there right now, that if you don't have an inclination to either be to be a service member, or if you're not looking for the GI Bill, if you have other means, then that's probably going to contribute to it. Beyond that, I don't really know. I mean, I'm careful to say, as a single person this is it. Now, what do I think about my kids serving? I couldn't be more proud. My son graduated from Ranger School. I think it was 32 years to the day that I graduated. I graduated in 35 years to the day. I graduated in 1985, November 11th. He graduated 2020, November 11th. And there was a big article done in the paper of us, and I just couldn't be more proud of him. My daughter is married to a young man that's a classmate of my son's from West Point, that's an AH-64 pilot. He's smart, he's articulate, he speaks multiple languages, and he's just a great kid. And my son doesn't plan to stay in. He wants to get out and go to med school. I don't know what my son-in-law will do, because he's a pilot. He owes more time than my son does. But I couldn't be more proud that both of them chose, that they're both very much connected to a profession of arms that I absolutely love. If I had a second life to live, I would be a soldier. I have 23 years in the Army, Randy, right now. People ask me all the time, they say, hey, how long are you going to stay? And I jokingly say, I'm going to transition from an active duty paycheck to Social Security. Because I don't know what I would do if I retired right now. I don't know what I could do that could give me the satisfaction and the joy. On July 4th, I was in the hospital with one of my service members that was in ICU. And my wife, who is just a rock star of a military wife, she sat outside in the car where I went in the hospital. I wasn't sure whether she'd come up with me or not. I sat with this family for an hour. I prayed with them before I left. I got in the car and I looked at my wife and I said, I love what I do. I can't imagine. I believe that God created me to be a military chaplain. And I'm very proud of the fact that I'm in uniform still, and my kids are in uniform. And I don't know. I don't know why they're not joining. I'll tell you that they're missing an opportunity for selfless service and sacrifice, and to do something that no one could ever take away from them. So I hope at some point the pendulum shifts back the other way, and it does it without a war.
I think
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, besides dispelling myths and just inaccuracies that people might have in their heads, hearing of personal stories like yours is certainly going to help also balance the scales in terms of what people think about it. And that I couldn't have imagined a more ringing endorsement than the one you just gave for all sorts of reasons. I have a practical question, but before I ask it, I'm going to let Randy jump in.
No, well, I mean, I'm just going to reinforce kind of the effect that a person like Charlie has on units that I was in, because Charlie went to Ranger school. Charlie was in a Ranger battalion as an infantryman. Charlie jumps out of airplanes, and it makes him a lot more relatable, at least in my experience, than other chaplains who haven't kind of walked that walk. So when we go to combat, you know, Charlie's been to combat with our Green Beret unit, you know, to be there in the best and worst moments over there. And he's also jumped out of airplanes with us, and he's seen, you know, the exhaustion that people going through that and Ranger school, and having, you know, walked that trail with us in a lot of areas. And he never shirked, you know, hey, we're going to go on a 20-mile ruck march, you know, next week. And he's the first one to put his backpack on and walk among the troops going, hey, man, are you okay? Because if you're okay, pick it up, you know. And so that was, you know, he's very motivating, but he's very empathetic at the same time. And he can also, I mean, I was always very confident to, you know, talk to him about anything. And I think a lot of other of my peers were too. So, but that drives me to another question that, you know, I don't think I know the answer to, but you know, it's something like what's the best and the worst part? You kind of talked about some of your favorite parts, but what's the best and worst part about being a military chaplain?
Well, the best part is the impact on lives. I love to help people. I just love to help people. I see myself as a problem solver, an answer guy. I try to communicate to people that I don't care what the problem is. If you can't get a solution or you don't want to start with me. If it's a personal problem, if it's a relationship problem, if it's a pay problem, if it's something with your assignment or orders or anything, I don't care what it is. I just want to help people. So the best part for me is to help people. What's the worst part? Well, that's a tough question to answer, because the truth of it is that empathetically, a service member or their family members, the worst day in their life when I'm called as the chaplain is a weird mix of a really great day in my life. Not because I am in some way, shape, or form glad that they're having the worst day of their life, but it's such an honor. It's such a privilege that when someone's child dies and the first phone call they make is to you. I've had to deal with that multiple times, or a service member is killed, or you're in the role 3 in Afghanistan when there's been a mass cow, and you're the one, and I'm the one calling spouses. You know, those are tough days. But I think if you have if I can, not to sound corny, but a divine calling to do that, then there's this supernatural empowerment to do something that others, people say to me all the time, I don't know how you do it. And it's not a second thought to me. It's genuinely a deep joy. But the worst part is, you know, it's breaking bad news to families. It's having to tell someone news that's going to impact the rest of their life. I'll tell you what the worst part is for me. You know what the worst part is for me? The suicide issue in the military. It's the worst part. I've personally dealt with over 50 suicides since 2009. The worst part is having to give words of encouragement to a congregation when a grieving family is sitting to my front left, and everyone in that room knows that this didn't need to happen. That's the worst part for me. That's it. That hands down, that's the worst part. It's the suicides. When I was just out at Fort Bliss, Texas, I had a company commander that committed suicide. It was grievous just the unit grieved about, you know, man, how did we not see this coming? And I'm glad to say that I think the Army is on an uptick or a downtick, I guess, in reducing those numbers. But that's the worst part. Suicide, sexual assault, having to deal with victims who have been assaulted. That's the worst part.
You referred to yourself, I think, at one point as a force multiplier, someone who, and you've said this a couple of times, you're open to helping in any way that you can. It doesn't matter what it is. Someone's got a question, come to me. If there's something you can do to help at that moment, you'll do it, which is a great attitude, by the way. And it's something Randy and I have talked about on other podcasts about how to get ahead in your career generally and be a valued team member, that openness to help in whatever way you can. And of course, having the ability to help by having some skills and knowledge and expertise and gathering new expertise. I think you've got a lot of different ways that you might be able to help the people that you're interacting with. But it does raise the question, if you can do and do so many different things to help, how would you describe a typical day? Or a typical week or a month? How does your time get spent? Do you travel around to different locations? Are you seeing the same people all the time? Are you seeing different people? How much of it is spending time on staff activities versus the other activities? I'm curious if you could give some flavor for what your days look like.
So that's a great question, and that is entirely predicated on the assignment. So I just left an assignment where I was on division staff, and I was the deputy division chaplain, and my day was consumed with staff work. It was draining to me because I'm a people person, because I enjoy spending time with people. And I didn't get to spend as much time with people because I was responsible for, writing reports and updating trackers and, writing memorandums and running information down. And so my job was really to work for the division chaplain, as I would be equated to like his executive officer. And so it was a very administrative. And so I did that job for 10 months. And to be honest with you, it was the 10 hardest months I've done as a chaplain. It wasn't a hard job. It was the hardest job I've done as a chaplain because it was almost entirely administrative in nature. So outside of those 10 months, let's talk about the rest of the time, like even where I'm serving now. A typical day for me is every single day, unless something prevents me, begins with physical exercise. And for me, it's running. I run between 200 and 250 miles a month. And I'm a little bit neurotic about it. This morning, my command sergeant major wanted to go for a road march. I tried to talk him into walking, and he said, "No, or into running." He says, "No, let's walk so we can talk." So I walked an hour and a half with him, and when we finished, he left. I took my pack off and I changed my shoes into my running shoes, and I went and ran 10 kilometers because I hadn't ran, because I got to run every day because it's good for this thing up here. So my typical day is that I begin with exercise, and then I go in the morning. I kind of jokingly, I kind of like a politician. I walk from office to room to office to room, and I just kind of check on the force. How you doing? What'd you do last night? I get a cup of coffee, and then I get to finally make my way to my computer, and I'll check my emails to see if I have any due outs. I check my calendar. I'm a planner. I like that. I have a 4-month planner up in my office that I keep up to date every day. I check with my non-commissioned officer to see if we have any meetings or any due outs that's coming. Typically, there's always something that's on the schedule. I'm usually on a couple of different teams that are planning events, and so I make my way to those meetings. And then as time permits, I get around and see additional people. I have people that schedule counseling with me. I have a lot of walk-ins. I always leave my door open. The only time I shut my door is if somebody's talking to me in private. Otherwise, I leave my door open. And so every day I get someone that'll walk by and say, "Hey, sir, you got a few minutes? Can I chat?" And that turns in, sometimes to lengthy conversations. I had one yesterday. I had a briefing that I was giving, and I had someone text me and say, "Hey, if you got some time, I need to talk." And that talk turned into 3 hours. And the beauty of it for me is that what I've told my commands, and everywhere I've been in the Army, I've said, "Listen, I'm very good at keeping up with my calendar. I know when meetings happen, and I'm not late to anything. So if I'm late or I miss one of your meetings, I need you to give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm doing something for one of your soldiers or their families that's more important than this meeting." And so, I missed something yesterday because I was with a soldier for over 3 hours. And my commands have always been like, "That's exactly what we want you to do, Charlie." So That's kind of the typical day, but there's no real typical day. Some days it means I'm at a drop zone at 4 o'clock in the morning to do sustained airborne training. And I'm doing exactly what Randy said. I'm making multiple exits from an aircraft and I get home at 10 o'clock at night. And sometimes it means I'm getting on an aircraft and I'm going somewhere else in the world to go do a short deployment or a long deployment.
So you, I think, just answered one of my questions, but I want to explore just for a second because I really don't know. And sorry if this is a dumb question, but do you start much earlier in the day in order to be able to get your 10 miles of running in a day? And is it an 8-hour day, a 10-hour day, or obviously sometimes it goes considerably longer?
Yeah.
And indirectly, and this is a second point, but I'll just throw it on here because maybe it illuminates the question. Is being an Army chaplain a good job? Is it a good way to have a good profession, earn good money? How does it compare to being a person who's ordained outside of the military and serves somewhere else? If you can say.
Yeah. So let's go to the first question: is how long is a typical day? It depends. There's rarely ever a day that's not a 12-hour day.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's 12-hour days are the typical days. When you roll in the fact of physical training and then the things that are going and all that we have doing. So my typical day starts at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I'm usually home sometime between 5 and 6 on this job. My last job, it was sometime between 6:30 and 8 p.m. at night. So depends on where you are. We don't get paid by the hour, and I've never complained about the work, and my family's never complained about the work. Someone, anecdotally said, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I've worked a lot of long days, but I don't complain about the days because the Army is also very good at trying to compensate us with, 4-day weekends. I'm in an organization where we get at least one 4-day weekend a month. And for the most part, they leave those untouched. So you get that time off. So that's kind of how the days go, the hours go. Is it a good profession? I think it is. I think it is an honorable, phenomenal profession, but it's not for everyone. If you're not geared to be a soldier, if you're not geared to sweat and to keep yourself physically fit and to maintain military standards for your height and weight, and to be able to continue to grow as a professional and not have a lot of say on where you live. My wife and I are in our 23rd home, 36 years of marriage. This is our 23rd house. 6 times I've moved within 1 year in the Army. I've had very little say of where I've gone because the Army gives you orders, not suggestions. Is it a good fit for everyone? It's not. Sometimes you get people that want to be chaplains and they don't understand that they're also soldiers. I had a chaplain that worked, a subordinate chaplain that I was responsible for supervising in a previous unit, and he often complained about having to go outside when it's cold or be in the rain or sleep in the rain or walk with a pack on his back. And I said, hey man, you are an Army chaplain. If you want to just be a minister, if you want to be a minister that doesn't do that, then get out of the Army and go pastor a church. You can do that. But it is a unique skill set, and it's a calling, and it's not always easy. So it is a great profession, but it's not for everyone.
All right. Well, that's a good balance that you've offered to the otherwise ringing endorsement, and it's only fair to give an accurate picture. I have a question, but go ahead, Randy.
No, I just I wanted to actually elaborate on what you didn't answer, which was, what's the difference between being a civilian chaplain and a military chaplain? I don't know how. I kind of know how civilian chaplains get paid too. They usually get paid through their church, part of it, and part of it through the church organization pays a piece of it, and then the actual congregation might pay a piece. It depends on which denomination you are. I think that's what my experience with my dad working with the church is. But I know in the military, James, the chaplains are officers, so they get paid whatever a normal captain and Rangers gets paid. that's leading the company, the chaplain who's a captain will get paid the same. And if he's airborne, he'll get the same airborne pay. So when they get promoted to, he's a lieutenant colonel, he'll get paid lieutenant colonel pay just like anyone else. But I don't know the workload difference between the two, and I don't know what a chaplain does in the community and normally either. So what's, you did both. So what's the difference for there, Charlie?
It's a pretty big difference. When I was a pastor of a church, I pastored 3 different churches over the time period that I was out while I was going through seminary and then got my degrees. And the churches were all loving and kind, but they were small churches. And Patty was a stay-at-home mom. And we lived on a very, very tight budget. Did not complain. We made ends meet. But there was no excess. There was no excess. It took us years to stop shopping with a list and a calculator after I came back in the Army. And I did not come back in the Army for the pay. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't about the pay. The first time I got paid, I was certain the Army had overpaid me. We had learned to live on such a small amount. I got my first paycheck when I was in my basic course, and I went to the cadre and I said, "Hey, I got to go to finance." They said, "Why? What's up?" And I said, I've been grossly overpaid." And they're like, "Well, what'd you get paid?" And I handed them my pay statement, and they were like, "That's what a captain with an O3E is what I was. That's what an O3E gets paid in the Army." And I was like, "There's no way I get paid this much money." And they're like, "It ain't that much money." And I was like, "That's a lot of money." I think I told Patty, I was like, "Hey, I'm going out to eat tonight." So
just so James knows, he got paid more than a chaplain who came in, sort of from college, I guess, or he was like 22 or 23, because he had 8 years as enlisted. That's wrapped up. So in the military, you get paid by rank and time in the Army, okay. And it's there's a grid. So he's getting paid more than his peers, most of them probably because he already had 8 years in.
Yeah. And then as far as the workload goes, Randy, when I was a pastor, I worked long hours as a pastor. I worked more night hours than day hours, though, because as a pastor, you're predominantly going to see your congregants in the evening after work. So there were a lot of nights where I would get home late at night, and I controlled my mornings. So oftentimes I would maybe not go into my church office until maybe 10 o'clock in the morning, or sometimes until lunchtime, depending upon what the evening was. So it afforded me an opportunity to like take my kids to school or have lunch with my kids because they were little at school. But then oftentimes I would miss supper at night because of that. So it's a balance. It's a trade. What you don't do when you're a civilian pastor is leave your family entirely for 9 months or a year or 15 months. You don't leave them, with no notice for weeks or months at a time. So there's the difference in that as well. It is very different. They're not the same. I do preach in chapel services, and I'm free to preach entirely by my convictions, because if you come to that service, you come willingly, knowing that you're choosing to come to that service. So I can be very, very clear and direct with my faith background when I'm preaching in chapel services. But because I'm an Army chaplain, with a lot of other responsibilities, I don't preach weekly. That was one of the things that I missed initially when I came back in. When I was a pastor, I spoke 3 times a week for 52 weeks a year. And I did that for years and years and years. And then when I came back in as a chaplain, I did well if I got to speak. If I get to speak twice a month, I'm on a pretty regular basis.
So Randy and I, in our podcasts, try to highlight takeaways and lessons learned for people. I heard a couple that I just want to highlight, and we'll see if you agree with them. But from the 2 of the things you said, one, the early supervisor who asked you about a conversation you had, and you explained why preserving confidentiality was so important. The second being the story about, well, if I miss a meeting, here's why it's important. It's because I'm talking to one of your soldiers. In both cases, I would say that demonstrates really good communication skills, but also good expectation management, and avoiding your having to have that conversation multiple times. And in fact, avoiding needing to have it more than once with that person by really saying quite clearly and definitively, hey, this is important. Let me explain something. And then you've had that conversation once. That's a really good a really good thing to do if the setting is correct in terms of managing the expectations of not just your bosses, but your colleagues around you, letting them understand that there's a purpose to what you're doing. So I like that. I thought that was a really good takeaway that people could apply to anything that they're doing, frankly. I'm not sure the right angle to get into passionately wrong. This is not the way to do it, but I'll ask the question anyway. I think you referred earlier to your serving as a non-combatant. If you're deployed somewhere, how does the enemy know that? Do you look different? Do you behave different? Are you at risk of getting shot because you don't have your own weapon? How does that play out in practice, if you can say?
Yeah, you're absolutely at risk of getting shot because you haven't got your own weapon. The only way they can tell that you're a non-combatant is because you haven't got a gun in your hand shooting back at them. I wear a cross on my chest. I don't expect the enemy to have a set of binoculars, though, looking and saying, hey, don't shoot anyone that has a cross or a set of tablets on their chest. It's the risk that you take, right? It's the risk that you take. No greater love is this than he was willing to lay down his life for his others or for his brother, right? Jesus said that. It's a risk that you take. It's a risk that I gladly take. I mean, I'm happy to walk the ground with my brothers and sisters that are out there and doing what we're called and asked to do. There's no guarantees. I kind of jokingly have said I'd rather burn out than fade out. Men and women that put on the uniform, and it's tragic for a single soldier or a service member to die in uniform in a foreign land, but we all know what we're signing up for. We all know it. We only lost one chaplain in combat activity in Afghanistan in all of the war. Chaplain Getz died because of his vehicle hit an IED and it killed him. And it was tragic, but he will be forever remembered as someone who laid down his life for others and did it willingly. So yeah, we do a lot of other things. I always posture myself. I've got 4 combat deployments, and I've always tried to posture myself near the medics. Because typically when you start getting folks getting injured or getting shot or blown up, there's typically not enough hands. And so I try to get CSL combat or CLS combat lifesaver certified, refresh that each time before deployments. And then I try to posture up with those medics and say, hey man, I'm here to help you, whatever you need. I'll hand you stuff, or I'll put on tourniquets or whatever you need. And I have found that it's always welcoming. It's always welcoming. And I've unfortunately held the hand of dying men and seen all the gruesome gore that comes with it.
All right. Randy makes it a little bit easier for me to identify obvious mistakes and passionate wrongdoing than you have done, Charlie, and I suppose I'm happy for that. But one thing that I think Randy did do well, as he described it over the course of his military career, was to make his wishes known. And he was in the Army just like you were and didn't always get what he wanted, but by being flexible and open, he found he could get to interesting, good places, even if they weren't the ones that he had in some sort of master plan. You talked about the quality of your own service being impacted by the assignments that you get, and you gave the example of your staff assignment being important, but maybe not as fulfilling as some of the other work you do. Do you have, I don't know how many different assignments are available to you. Do you have any flexibility in being able to say, hey, I'd really like to be over here, and is there a way to get back doing that over there? Or is it pretty much the Army needs what the Army needs and you go where they tell you? I know you go where they tell you, but.
Yeah, we've come a long way in that too. My branch is pretty good about trying to get you what you need. They typically say, they'll ask us and they'll say, you have a move cycle coming up in 8 or 9 months. So they try to plan 8 or 9 months out. And so you can kind of say, hey, I either want location or I want assignment. And so what I have always said, I'm kind of greedy. So I've always said, I want to be east of the Mississippi and I want static line in my hand. So I want to be on jump status, but I want to be stationed east of the Mississippi. Now there's only so many assignments that can accommodate that. And sometimes you get one and not the other. When I went to General Command Staff College in 2017 and 18, when I was coming out, I'd said that I was coming out as a major. I needed to have I needed to have a brigade job, and I wanted to go to the 82nd Airborne, or I wanted to go to one of the special forces groups or somewhere else. I want to go east of the Mississippi, and I want static ground in my hand. And I still remember my branch manager said to me, well, I'm going to give you 100% of half of that. And I'm like, all right, what am I getting? And he said, you're going east of Mississippi. I said, all right, I'm not going to have static ground in my hand. Where am I going? He said, you're going as far east of the Mississippi as we can send you. Fort Drum, New York. But I will tell you, I kind of went to Fort Drum kind of like, oh man. And I loved it. My wife and I loved it. My son was at West Point. My daughter was at University of Massachusetts. And we're both outdoors people. And we loved upstate New York. The people, the culture, the climate, the snow, the summer. It was stunningly beautiful. And so God knows what's best is the lesson we learned from that.
I would also say, James, that the higher you get in rank, maybe the less choices there are available, just because there's less positions. So
Yeah.
it's a pyramid. So when you get to, lieutenant colonel, there's only like 20 positions in the whole army or something. I don't know. I'm just making numbers up. But the higher in rank you go, you get less and less positions. So even if you wanted to go east of the Mississippi and to a static line, there might only be one position in the whole army that's for a lieutenant colonel in that area that fits that thing. But if you're a captain or a lieutenant, there's probably 30, 40 positions. So, and it's all about timing too, because the positions are 2 years, minimum
Right.
sometimes. So that if that guy's not ready to change out, but you are, then you kind of got to take what's left over.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Randy. That's great. Think of it like this. There's one chaplain for every command. So if there's one battalion commander, there's one chaplain. If there's one brigade commander, there's one chaplain. If there's a division commander, there's one chaplain. So if there's 32 BCTs in the Army, there's 32 brigade chaplains. If there's 11 divisions in the Army, there's 11 division chaplains, which are O5s. And so that is right. The higher you go, the less choices that you have. But the beauty of it is the longer you're in the Army, the less undesirable choices you have to take. Because you can always just say, I'm done.
And also the more qualifications. So he's airborne. They're not going to throw a non-airborne chaplain into an airborne unit. So that opens up his kind of apertures to have more job opportunities than he would than a normal chaplain who's not airborne, for instance, or not ranger qualified. I don't think you have to be ranger qualified to be in a ranger unit. I don't know if that's true anymore or not. I think it was back in the day.
Then
there's probably not that many ranger qualified people. So, therefore, but you don't have to be special forces qualified to be a special force. It's really kind of weird there. That's kind of odd.
Yeah.
But anyway, you could probably count the number of chaplains with ranger tabs on one or two hands in the whole military. And then airborne chaplains are probably a couple fistfuls, but still he's opened up. He's got more opportunity than most people.
And then you get guys that have the qualifications, but they're unwilling to do the job. So you'll get guys that have airborne wings, but they said, I don't want to jump out of planes anymore. So, whereas I'm that crazy guy that just says, man, I will jump out of anything day or night. If it flies.
How many jumps you got? How many jumps you got, Charlie?
I'm just under 150. I'm hoping to get to 173 here so I can be a member of the 173rd club. I got my 100th jump in the 173rd. I want to be a member of the 173rd club. So, and every time I land, I say, oh, that's 2% more disability.
Yeah, I hear you. I was actually pretty when I got assigned to Italy, which when Charlie was on his way out, but he was there for like 6 more months after I landed, and I signed into my unit. I have never ever been in a unit my whole life that wasn't jump. So I 32 years up to, at that point it was like 28 years. I had almost 28 years straight with like some schools that I went to that I wasn't allowed to jump. But other than that, I was jump. And that means you have to jump 4 times a year to maintain your status. And so I had 28 years. I got to Italy. I was really tired of jumping. I got to Italy and they said, oh, we're going to take your jump pay. I was like, take it.
173 club. That is a lot of 4 jumps a year. So
Yeah. Well, that's
Well,
the
he
minimum.
jumps. That's the minimum to keep
no,
your
I know.
jump.
I'm just doing the
Yeah.
math. That's a lot of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is also off the wall, but it strikes me that the combination of the circumstances that you found yourself in, the absolute confidentiality, if you were ever to decide to anonymously, of course, write about some of the stuff that you've seen and heard and done, you would have an endless supply of subjects for interesting stories. Do you know, and Randy, maybe do you know any chaplains who've gone on to, or maybe on the side, write fiction, mysteries, anything that is calling upon your vast and varied experience of human nature in every setting?
I'm trying to convince him to be that because I'll edit his book, but I don't know. I don't know if he's. I don't know any chaplains that have written, any kind of fiction books about using all their kind of life stories in it.
When I left 7th group, because 7th Special Forces group was so naughty, if I can use that term, I left there.
It's a very, very timid term, probably what you're talking about.
I told them I felt like I'd been a chaplain on a pirate ship for the last 2 years. And I said, and when I retire, I said, I just want all of you hooligans to know I'm going to write a book and I'm not changing names or places just so you will buy it to see your story. So yeah, I would never out them. If I wrote something, I would change names and places. But I've jokingly said many times, man, could I ever write a book? Sometimes I'll lay in bed at night and just start thinking back about different experiences and stories. And ultimately what it leads me to is not the idea of writing a book, but gratitude for the life that I've lived and the calling that I've had and the opportunities that I've been given. I'm 57. I turned 57 last month, and I still can't imagine what life after the Army looks like for me. Well, I don't know. Randy's making it look pretty good. Randy's making it look pretty good. My wife's building a list of things that we have to do too. I'm typically having to do whatever Randy's done. Hey, Randy did that hike. We got to do that hike. Randy's traveled here. We got to travel here. So Randy needs to stop telling my wife what he's doing.
I will just encourage you to say that short of writing a book, there is a much simpler activity that might serve as a great intellectual outlet for you after you are of Social Security age and put up your wings or whatever you call it. And that is short stories. An 800-word piece that describes a single incident can be entertaining, illuminating, provoking, and it takes you 2 hours to write. And then you've got a piece of otherwise brilliant history that's going to go lost and unremarked. And there's so many places now to publish those things and to put them up, and you would find a huge audience, not just the people wondering if they were going to be mentioned, but a lot of people, because it's so unusual. And there aren't a lot of people who have, I don't think I've ever heard of someone who has your experience. I can tell you I would read them, and I know there would be others as well. So keep that in mind. A short story is much easier to start with, and then over the course of, with your work ethic and discipline, you'd crank out 5 a week for 5 years, and then you'd have material for an awesome book, which Randy would edit.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I think we've covered most of the questions we had in mind. I should turn it back to you, Charlie, and say, was there anything that you wanted to make sure came out over the course of this for us or for listeners, myths we haven't dispelled, or just an inspirational message you'd like to leave people with?
Yeah, one thing I get asked this question a lot from church members or from folks from my denominational background, and I often get asked the question, hey, as an Army chaplain, do you have to be all things to all people? So if you have a Roman Catholic soldier and they're dying, are you taught how to offer last rites? Or if you have a Muslim soldier or a Buddhist soldier, and the answer to that question is no. That goes back to the provide or perform. I perform for like-minded of the same faith. I find a way to provide for those that are not. And so I don't act like I'm a Roman Catholic priest when I'm not. I don't act like I'm an imam when I'm not. So I don't act like I'm a rabbi when I'm not Jewish. But when I have a Jewish soldier and they want to be married or they have an issue, I go find a Jewish rabbi and so forth. And that's probably the most common misconception that I run across when I talk to other folks that are in the church or in my denominational background about being a chaplain. Because I've had folks that said to me, how do you rectify that with your theology if you have to act like you're Roman Catholic when you're not? And I said, I don't act like I'm Roman Catholic ever. I don't have to do that. And let's be honest, anyone who's a practicing Roman Catholic, they don't want me to do that. They want a priest, right? And a Muslim soldier doesn't want a Protestant Christian to come and pray with them. They want an imam. So that's probably the biggest misconception that I have to address.
Do you think that people there's obviously less people in the military that are Muslim or a lot of these other religions besides Roman Catholic and Protestant. Do they do less, I guess is the question? I mean, because most of the soldiers aren't going to relate as closely with them because they don't have a similar religion.
So that's a good question, Randy. And it goes back to the fact that every chaplain is also a staff officer. So every chaplain has got staff work that they have to do in their organization. So no one gets out of that. What I have found actually is that some of the lower density, meaning that we have way fewer rabbis than we have Presbyterian, right? What I found is that the chaplains that are in those lower densities sometimes work more because we ask more of them. We will often ask for a rabbi or an imam to be stationed somewhere where they are regularly having to travel to all of the other locations where there isn't an imam or a rabbi. And so I have found that they don't work less. They often actually have to do more because more is required because there's less of them.
Makes sense. I'll just say that we've talked about a little bit about this, James. He said, Charlie said he woke up at 5 and worked, easily 12 hours a day. I would say for anybody E6 and above, that's probably a normal military day anyway. The difference most likely is, especially if you're a staff guy, if you're, a sergeant first class or above, you're in some kind of staff usually, and you're staying late because that's what the boss wants. I would say that the chaplains and maybe the sergeant majors work the longest on long weekends and weekends. Everyone else can probably trust to take those 4 days off. And then there's always that one guy or those 5 guys that during those 4 days off, they want to make it so that the chaplain and the sergeant major have to come in and deal with whatever his shenanigans are. But yeah, I'd say the chaplain works probably one of the hardest workers time wise. And then maybe second to that. And also I'd say that as a sergeant major, that was my favorite part about being a sergeant major was problem solving, because people said, hey, you've been in the Army for so long and you've been doing this job for so long. And so you maybe come along with this problem, and they'd say, hey, you got a few minutes. And that was my job too. I as a sergeant major, I'd go around, wander door to door and say, hey, what's going on? And try to actually, I would usually offer some kind of tactical, strategical kind of stuff depending on where I am. But if I'm going, just into a team room, I'm like, what's going on, guys? And ideally someone's like, hey, I'd like to talk to you for a minute, like come into my office. So in a way, I would never, compare myself apples to apples to what Charlie does, but apples to oranges, we're still in the same fruit basket. And that's what I liked most about my job as well.
I cannot agree more. I agree. I mean, Randy, that is absolutely correct. I've said so many times that the 2 people in an organization that should be recognized as that will always care about soldiers are the sergeant major and the chaplain. By the time you reach the rank of sergeant major, you're not carrying, you have a weapon still to carry, but you're not expected to be on a gun or in a truck. You are a problem solver. You are taking care of soldiers. And so it's always bothered me when on the very rare occasions I've had the sergeant major that communicates either intentionally or inadvertently that he doesn't care about his soldiers. because that's exactly why they're there. They're there to care for soldiers. And I've been very fortunate in my Army career from start to finish to have been very good friends with almost every sergeant major I've served with. This morning I walked with my sergeant major. It's frickin' frack. It's Pete and repeat. Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks for joining us on the podcast, Charlie. That was great.
And I'm honored that you asked me, Randy. I'm honored that you asked me. I look forward to the product. And James, it's very good to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. And maybe at some point, the three of us will get together and we can clink glasses.
That sounds great. The honor was ours, Charlie. This was a really good interview, and you've taught us a lot, and our listeners as well. So we appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
All right.
All right, and for all our listeners, thanks for joining us, and tune in next week and subscribe and leave comments, please. Thanks a lot. See you later.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.